No one in this country is above the law. Everyone must be accountable for their actions, even this defendant. However, Hunter Biden should be no more accountable than any other citizen convicted of this same conduct.
After just a few hours of deliberation, Hunter Biden has been found guilty of 3 federal gun charges. The jury in Wilmington, Delaware, found that in 2018, the president's son lied on a mandatory gun purchase form about his drug use. This is the first time a sitting president's immediate family member has been found guilty of a crime. Hunter Biden is now facing up to 25 years in prison and fines up to $750,000. Joining me now is the Hill staff writer, Ella Lee, who's been covering the trial closely. Now, Hunter has just been found guilty on all counts. What's next, and when will sentencing occur?
Yeah, so the judge overseeing Hunter Biden's case, Judge Mary Ellen Noreika, she did not schedule a sentencing date after the jury convicted Hunter Biden today, but she did note that sentencings are typically scheduled about 120 days after a verdict. So that would place Hunter Biden's sentencing about 4 months away in October, which is right before the election, of course, when his father, President Biden, is expected to go up against former President Trump for a second time.
Now, President Biden has said he would not pardon his son Hunter, but are there other legal pathways for the president to step in if he's sentenced to a lengthy prison term?
Sure. So even today, President Biden said in a statement that he intends to accept the outcome of the case against his son. He's going to continue to respect the judicial process while Hunter Biden is mounting his appeal. As you said, he said he won't pardon Hunter, but in theory, as president, he could commute a lengthy sentence. That would mean essentially knocking time off of Hunter Biden's sentence and allowing him to leave prison a little bit earlier than the judge originally decided. Even though that power is within Hunter Biden's discretion, or President Biden's discretion, he hasn't given any indication one way or another that that's what he plans to do.
And Hunter Biden is actually just a first-time offender here, so while he's facing up to 25 years, it likely won't be that long of a sentence. What are the odds that Hunter receives any jail time at all?
Yeah, so 25 years in prison is the absolute highest end of that spectrum. There's 10 on the first count, 5 on the second, and 10 on the third. And first offenders, like himself, are rarely sentenced to that maximum penalty. In his case, federal guidelines call for a sentence between 15 to 21 months or somewhere between a year and 2 years in prison. But there are a ton of factors that could lead the judge to determine that a sentence outside those guidelines is warranted, whether that be more or less. At the end of the day, they're just guidelines. So Hunter Biden will likely be meeting soon with a federal probation officer who will interview him and put together a report with recommendations based on their conversation. And then on top of that, both federal prosecutors and Hunter Biden's attorneys are going to be filing memos with the judge with their own recommendations for his sentence. Ultimately, that decision for his sentence is fully at the judge's discretion, so we'll just have to see what she decides.
And do we think this case will be appealed? And if so, what's the process for Hunter and his attorneys? And what do they need to take into consideration if they want to do that?
Yeah, so after that verdict came down, Hunter Biden's attorney said that they're very disappointed by it and are planning to vigorously pursue all legal challenges available. So with that in mind, it's very likely that an appeal of the verdict is imminent. Hunter's team, even before the trial began, had accused the Justice Department, and namely Special Counsel David Weiss, of vindictively prosecuting him. And that's because the law used to charge him in this case is not one that's frequently used to bring charges. So when his attorney raised that issue months ago, a federal appeals court said that and several other rulings by the trial judge, including motions to dismiss the charges altogether, would have to wait until after the verdict. And now that we have a verdict, I expect that those appeals will be filed shortly.
And Biden is scheduled to deliver remarks on gun reform. While he has largely avoided discussing his son's case, could we see him react to the verdict?
It's very possible that President Biden will mention his son's case. I mean, it's hard not to draw the parallel between the topic of his remarks, gun reform, and Hunter's case, which obviously revolved around this unlawful purchase of a firearm. However, the president did release a statement after the verdict, reiterating that, in addition to being president, he's also a dad, and he's still proud of his son. And as I previously said, he would accept the outcome of the case. So it's just as possible that he intends for that statement to speak for itself.
All right. Thank you, Ella Lee. Secret recordings of Supreme Court justices at an exclusive gala in Washington could lead to more pressure for ethics reform at the court. On the recording, conservative Justice Samuel Alito appeared sympathetic to the idea that Americans need to return our country to a place of godliness and observe the nation as one of fundamental differences that can't be compromised. Alito's wife was also recorded at the event, vowing revenge against people who raised a controversy over politically charged flags the Alitos flew at their homes. The Hill White House reporter Brett Samuels joins us to discuss. Brett, Democrats have been talking a lot lately about reigning in the court. What can they actually do?
Well, the question, I guess, is how far are they willing to go to reign in the court and to pursue ethics reform around the Supreme Court? Certainly, as you mentioned, these recordings of Justice Alito and of his wife have just sort of added fuel to this already raging fire around Justice Alito's conduct and around this flag controversy where they flew this Stop the Steal flag after the 2020 election. But the question is whether Democrats in particular in the Senate are willing to subpoena Chief Justice Roberts in this case, whether they feel like that might be going too far, whether they're willing to use that for leverage. Otherwise, they may look at funding measures, but certainly the ball is in Democrats' court as far as how far they're willing to go here and what steps they're willing to take, or if they're worried about any kind of backlash here.
Yeah, and progressive groups have been pressuring Democrats to take a more hardline approach to the Supreme Court after the Alito controversies and after reports of conservative justices receiving millions of dollars in gifts from Republican donors. But so far, Senate Judiciary Chair Dick Durbin has been resisting calls for the subpoena of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Is there any notion that that could actually happen?
Right now, it seems like Democrats in particular are treading very carefully with the idea of a subpoena of the Chief Justice. They would certainly need the full support of all Democrats on the committee to move forward with that subpoena. Right now, it's not clear that they have that. I think there's some trepidation around, if they subpoena the Chief Justice, whether that could be enforceable. Certainly Republicans could view that as a political move and could then, gum up the works and slow down the work of the Judiciary Committee as far as confirming judges that President Biden has nominated. So certainly there are a lot of calculations here at play that I think Democrats are going to have to consider before they decide whether to move forward with the subpoena. But certainly it would be the strongest step they could take at this point to sort of enforce their push for more ethics reforms.
Democrats are launching a campaign to counter a sweeping Republican plan to remake the federal government known as Project 2025. The conservative framework would vastly reduce the size of the federal government and install loyalists to key government posts if Donald Trump retakes the White House. What is the reaction here from Democrats, Brett?
Right. So essentially, we're seeing Democrats, after months of sort of trying to warn the public about this Project 2025 and what's in it, as far as policy proposals on abortion, policy proposals on, the independence of the Justice Department. Democrats are finally sort of taking some substantive steps here to potentially fight back against this Project 2025 by creating a task force in the House specifically, where Democratic lawmakers would basically essentially lay the framework for how they would respond to a Trump presidency if former President Trump is elected in November and wins a second term. Democrats would then be more prepared to address some of these policy proposals that are in Project 2025 and basically would not be caught flat-footed in trying to push back against some of these proposals. So certainly I think it underscores the seriousness with which Democrats are approaching the prospect of a second Trump term. But it's just we're in for a few more months of this, of sort of this back and forth around the fight over what a second Trump presidency could look like.
Yeah, and Trump is actually set to meet with Republican senators here in Washington this week. He's had a rocky relationship with some of them in the past, but as of late, it appears they are pretty much in lockstep, marching toward the November election. What's this meeting about?
Yeah, lockstep is a great way to put it. Even Senator McConnell, who's the Republican leader in the Senate, him and Trump have not spoken in years, really, but McConnell still has endorsed Trump in the 2024 race. So it just goes to show how Trump has really, gotten these Republican lawmakers to fall in line for the most part. Sources have told us that this meeting on Thursday will be policy focused, as far as what agenda Trump and Republicans might pursue if he wins November's election and gets a second term in the White House, whether it be focusing on, extending tax cuts or passing, energy reform or anything like that. So That's expected to be on the docket for Thursday. We should note also that Trump is going to meet with House Republicans as well. So Trump is sort of making the most of his one day in D.C. here this week, where he's going to meet with as many Republicans who are willing to meet with him on the Hill, and as you said, sort of project this sense of unity and cohesion heading into November's election.
And voters are heading to the polls in primary races across the country. A couple of themes at play: Trump's endorsement power and revenge being sought by former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. What are you watching for as these voters head to the polls?
Yeah, sort of easy to forget that primaries are still going on with all the focus on November's election already. But, in South Carolina, as you mentioned, one of the most interesting races or high-profile races will be that of Representative Nancy Mace, who, as you mentioned, Kevin McCarthy has really tried to hold her accountable, essentially, for her role in voting to oust Kevin McCarthy, that is, as Speaker last year. McCarthy has talked about supporting her primary opponent, trying to get Nancy Mace out of Congress, painting her as an opportunist and somebody who's sort of a flip-flopper. So Trump has endorsed Mace. We'll see if Kevin McCarthy has the juice to back a primary challenger and put up a serious fight there. And then in Nevada, also an interesting Senate primary where Trump only just endorsed Sam Brown, the candidate there in the Nevada Senate primary, just in the last couple days here. So whether that will be enough of a late boost to propel him over Trump's former ambassador to Iceland, Jeff Gunter, who is also sort of seeking Trump's endorsement. And there was certainly some sparring over securing that endorsement. So in Nevada, certainly we'll be keeping an eye out on how far Trump's endorsement goes and whether his record stays clean in some of these Senate races.
Yeah, and Sam Brown, the preferred candidate of kind of establishment Republicans there. So Trump kind of playing nice with national Republicans and helping them, in their eyes, get Sam Brown across the finish line there. Let's talk about the House Rules Committee taking up the issue of holding Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of court. Brett, all this has to do with Garland's refusal to release audio recordings of President Biden's interview with the special counsel that investigated his handling of classified documents. Walk me through what happens next, and do Republicans have any recourse to actually get the recording?
Yeah, so we'll see this vote on the committee level, the House Judiciary Committee level, as far as holding the Attorney General in contempt. Now, if that passes, if Republicans are able to sort of hold the line and stay together on this, it would go to a full House vote. And again, that would be up to Republicans essentially to get that across the finish line, because Democrats are not going to support holding the Attorney General in contempt. And obviously, that full House vote would be interesting to watch because Republicans just have that very narrow margin where they can only afford just a couple defections. So certainly Republicans will need to keep everyone in line on that contempt vote in the full House floor. Now, House Republicans, they have pretty limited recourse as far as securing this actual recording of these tapes between President Biden and Special Counsel Robert Hur. Now, the Justice Department has maintained that Republicans have a transcript of those conversations. President Biden has asserted executive privilege over those recordings. So, their recourse is pretty limited here. And frankly, Democrats would argue this is a political play to try and get these recordings out into the public. But certainly this committee vote is the first step toward that.
Let's head overseas. Both Israel and Hamas are expressing openness to a ceasefire plan sponsored by the U.S. and approved by the UN Security Council. The three-phase plan would start with an immediate end to fighting and finish with a multi-year plan to rebuild Gaza. Brett, U.S. officials say it's now up to Hamas leadership to accept the deal.
Yeah, this UN Security Council vote certainly was a big step to sort of get everyone essentially in agreement on agreeing to something as sort of tense and tenuous and fractious as the conflict in the Middle East. So certainly a big step that the U.S. can tout there, that there is this support for this ceasefire proposal. Now, the question is, as you said, U.S. officials have said this is on Hamas to accept the terms of this deal. White House officials have said that Israel's government is supportive of this proposal. But obviously, Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel has sort of said, that there should be no ceasefire without the full destruction of Hamas and without the full release of all the hostages remaining. So there are still some sort of, I's to be dotted, T's to be crossed, and I think details to watch for here as far as whether they can get this across the finish line. But certainly this UN security vote was a very positive first step, I think, for sort of keeping the momentum going and keeping the ball rolling as far as getting this done.
An $800,000 donation to a top business group is pulling back the curtain on dark money in U.S. elections. During the 2020 primary cycle, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce received a wire transfer from billionaire donor Hank Meyer days after it endorsed his son, Peter Meyer, in a contentious Republican primary. Brett, what else do we need to know about this case, and how common is this type of influence in politics?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things to know about this is that it is sort of illustrative of, I think, a pretty common practice in politics, this idea of dark money, these big check donations that often you don't know, who's writing the check or where the money is originating. Certainly, this is a great example of where there wasn't necessarily direct coordination between Congressman Meyer's campaign and the Chamber of Commerce, but his father was obviously, cutting this check, and then Chamber of Commerce, without outright endorsing his son, ran ads that were sort of supportive of him and advocating for his records. So, I think this is just a really strong example in the reporting from my colleague Taylor Giorno of how dark money can influence politics, how these big checks are being written sort of behind the scenes to sort of influence these groups, to encourage these groups to back certain candidates. And then we may not find out about it, A, at all, or B, maybe not for years later. But certainly this has become, with the rise of super PACs and the rise of these big money groups, a much more common practice in politics these days.
All right. Thank you, Brett Samuels. The judge overseeing former President Trump's classified documents trial narrowing the prosecution's case against him. Judge Eileen Cannon took out a paragraph from the indictment against the former president, alleging Trump showed a classified map to a staffer and acknowledged that he shouldn't be showing him the map. Judge Cannon agreed with the defense, saying that paragraph was improper because prosecutors did not bring any charges related to that specific document. That exchange can still be used as evidence in trial. Meantime, Cannon also denied a motion from Trump's team seeking to toss the case. Trump still faces 41 counts in connection to those documents. That's it for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petromo. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.